Our next speaker today is Colby Raley. Colby is a strategist at Microsoft in the New Zealand public sector team, working to define and address the most pressing challenges facing the public sector. She was previously a director at PricewaterhouseCoopers, designing and delivering digital solutions to the New Zealand public sector. Before moving to New Zealand in 2013, she worked with research and funding organizations, bringing basic and applied research projects into reality and helping prioritize investments to drive innovation. Colby is focused on finding out how technology can help people and is passionate about improving the interaction between people and technology of all types. She's passionate about putting the user at the center of the equation and specializes in bringing people together to deliver technology-enabled solutions. Here to deliver her talk, AI for Cultural Heritage, please welcome Colby Raley. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. I was going to introduce myself, but I feel like that was a really long introduction, so I will sort of jump into it. As he mentioned, I'm part of our public sector team here in New Zealand with Microsoft, and in addition to doing those sort of program delivery type things, I've also been able to spend quite a lot of time playing in the AI space in the last year, which has been really exciting. So I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to talk to you guys and also to talk about an area that's really important to Microsoft globally. So AI for Cultural Heritage is actually one of our programs within our AI for Good portfolio. We do work around sustainability, accessibility, humanitarian aid. Those are the main areas that's with cultural heritage that fit into our AI for Good portfolio. And this is, I think it's a 5-year program, multi-hundreds of millions of dollars that Microsoft globally is investing in this. So it's really important to us as a company. So really excited for that linkage as well. I'll just start out by talking a little bit about how we got to what we often internally call the era of AI at Microsoft. We've been working in artificial intelligence for a very long time. And if you look back, this isn't that long ago, it goes back further than this, but if you look back to the mid-2010s, this is what I sort of think of as our breakthrough sort of time. So there was lots of activity happening in our Microsoft research arm. We were starting to achieve what we call human parity with a lot of tasks like object recognition, understanding words, but a lot of this was more in the research space. As time sort of went on, you started to see some supercomputing investment making this all a bit more real. But about a year ago, I feel like we entered our product innovation phase. The first product where we saw this new generative AI capability start to show up is in a product called GitHub, which developers use to write software, test it, come together as groups, produce software solutions. And generative AI came into GitHub to help developers develop more quickly. And it's been just an absolute resounding success. So much adoption. There's like very high statistics about once people start using this tool, how often they use it to write code and how happy they are, because it really relieves them of the burden of a lot of the administrative, having to go find an example and paste that in. They don't have to do those sorts of tasks anymore. So that's the first place that we saw this show up. And there's been lots of announcements over the last year where we're starting to see AI come into other spaces. But I think right around now, we've hit what I would call the age of the co-pilot. We've just had one of our big conferences last week, I think, our Ignite conference. We had over 100 announcements. Almost all of them were related to AI in some way. Even our announcements around building new chips, that's all in the service of being able to do AI better. There's lots of references to co-pilots here. I'll get to this a little bit later. But suffice to say, you're going to see generative AI capabilities coming into any sort of Microsoft tools that you already use today in lots of different ways. So this is a little bit about why we're really invested in this space. But I also thought I might go back and just talk a little bit about why this is different. There's so much chatter about artificial intelligence, and that's such a huge field. In my mind, if you think about the main things that have changed the way that that we're talking about AI these days, the things that sort of led us to be able to do generative AI, I think there's 3 things that have really led to that. One is the development of new models, new algorithms. So if you hear about the transformer architecture, that was first introduced in this paper. Attention is all you need. And that, I like to think of that as some of the smarts that sits behind better autocomplete. So rather than just guessing what the next word is, these models are starting to be able to understand a little bit of what you're trying to say and use that to predict a word rather than just guessing the next word. There's lots of other advancements in this space. You might hear about generative adversarial networks, GANs, which is a very fancy way of saying being able to pit 2 models against each other and have one of them say, how about this image? Is that good? And the other one says, not yet. And they go back and forth until they come up with a really good image. So advancements in this space are huge. Another area is around compute. So these models are really big. They take a lot of computing power, a lot of processing power to run them, and that is a lot more available now, especially with all of the cloud computing capabilities that are out there. You don't have to have this huge server in every single organization. You can leverage the power of the cloud. And the last major contributor is data. These models also need a lot of data to be trained on, and there is so much data, and it is a lot more accessible than it used to be. So I think these are the 3 big contributors that helped us get to this place that is different. And the other main thing I'd talk about in this space is the difference between what we think about as traditional or we were saying for a while historical AI, even though it's only like a year and a half ago, but traditional AI versus generative AI. Traditional AI is often called narrow or weak. It's not really weak, but it can be quite narrow, and it helps make predictions. A really simple example might be, when do people buy the most apples? Tuesdays, right? And so it learns this from the data. But you can also add more data over time. So perhaps you get additional sources of information that say, oh, actually, when you look at it, it's not the day of the week, it's the time of day. And so you can update the predictions. That's a really simple way of looking at it. But you can definitely learn over time. And you do produce these recommendations, decisions, personalizations. Some examples of that could be if anybody uses Netflix or Spotify or any type of social media, the things that bubble to the top of the list are recommendations that are powered by AI. If anybody logged into their phone with their face today, that's a decision that was enabled by AI. If anybody used a system that is sort of adapted to them by knowing characteristics about them, you like this sort of interface, you like this sort of experience, that's personalization that has been enabled by AI. Now, if you look at generative AI, there's many, many differences, many similarities, but many differences. But the big thing is that this actually creates new data based on patterns. So rather, if you ask ChatGPT, when do people buy apples? You're not going to get an answer like Tuesday. You're going to say, looking at the historical influences, or it really depends on where you are in the world. And this is because these models are looking at all the sorts of statistical patterns that they're seeing in the way that things are said over time, and it's picking out the things that are most important and then creating new content. So you get a story about when people are likely to buy apples, and this is part of what makes the generative AI, this creative AI that creates new material, so very different. Can create this novel human-like material in many modalities, text obviously, images, code, like I talked about before. And these sorts of questions are some of the questions that you might be able to use traditional or generative AI to answer. But I think the real power is when you bring these together. So you can get the personalization and the learning based on what you know about me, build me something new that is tailored to me. I'm going to start out with a couple of examples of where we're seeing generative AI show up in really cool ways. Be My Eyes, if anybody has heard about this, is a really, really cool company and app that connects blind and low vision people with volunteers that will help them navigate sort of everyday tasks that might feel like everyday tasks for the sighted. What's in this bottle? Is this orange juice expired? Really sort of just quick things to get through. And Be My AI is a new capability that they're starting to bring online, which you can probably guess. There's going to be a virtual assistant, not just human assistants. So they can, well, here, I'll let the video explain it.
Introducing the future, a new era of a system. Be my fashion advisor.
Take picture. Ask question. A blue sweater with a high neckline.
Be my green thumb.
Take picture. Ask question. This looks like an eucalyptus plant.
Be my translator.
It appears to be a bottle of Worcestershire chew. A Chinese mice line.
Be my maitre d'.
The second picture shows a page titled House Favorites. Would you like me to read out specific options?
Be my gym partner.
Then turn right and walk until you reach the first set of machines. The treadmills will be on your left.
Be my map.
Transfer to the central line and take the tube to Tottenham Court Road.
I have my autonomy. Be my guide.
It appears to contain various types of drinks such as Lucozade.
Be my gateway.
A white dress with a high neckline and long sleeves. It has a layered skirt with a scalloped hair.
Be my AI. Be my eyes.
Pretty cool. And you can imagine, in addition to the things that we can see in this, that people that are using this can also have a bit more of a conversation back and forth in whatever situation they're in. The other example I'm going to show is a chatbot that is actually out of India, and I just think this is such a great example of how we should be using this technology. The idea is to connect people all across the country in all different sorts of rural areas or urban areas, people who speak lots of different languages, so that they can understand what kind of supports are available to them.
मैं एक किसान हूँ अपने ही गांव में हमारी ज़मीन है 2 एकड़ उसमें ही हम खेती उगाते हैं रबी की और खरीफ की दोनों फसलें उगाते हैं जिसमें गेहूँ है जवार है बाजरा है तिल्ली है सरसों है बट यहाँ मेवात में अंदर बहुत से गांवों में न्यूज़पेपर नहीं पहुँच पाते हैं ये सरकारी स्कीमें पहुंचती हैं लेकिन ग्रामीण इलाकों में लोग योजनाओं की स्कीम पहुंच भी नहीं पाती है
These are all communities living in media dark areas, which means that penetration of traditional media like television and radio is very sparse. There's also literacy challenges, so things like newspapers have a very low access in these areas.
In India, we have 22 constitutionally recognized languages, but apart from that, we have more than 100, almost 120 languages. Being able to provide justice to each and every citizen in their own language, it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity.
Jugalbandi is a chatbot that we built to solve 2 problems. One is this linguistic divide and the technological divide. We collected millions of parallel sentences for machine translation. We collected thousands of hours of data for speech recognition. And then we built state-of-the-art models on top of it using Harshini speech recognition models and Azure's OpenAI. So these capabilities allows us to understand language, transcribe it, translate it, and also synthesize it back in the form of speech.
चचा यू जुगलबंदी है यहाँ पे हम लिख के भी और बोल के भी कुछ भी जो हमें स्कीम चाहिए सरकारी योजना है उनके बारे में जानकारी ले सका
मैं किसान हूँ मुझे सरकारी योजना कैसे प्राप्त हुई
मेरा नाम जुगलबंदी है मैं एक असिस्टेंट हूँ जो आपकी सरकारी योजना के बारे में जानने में और उसके लिए एनरोल करने में आपकी मदद करूँगी
तो वहाँ से हमें लिखित में भी और ऑडियो में भी दोनों तरीके से जवाब आया और किस किस डॉक्यूमेंट्स की ज़रूरत पड़ती है और किस किस फॉर्म की ज़रूरत पड़ती है
The Ministry of Electronics and IT in the country has been working on this for the last 5 years now. And when ChatGPT was launched, that was really the catalyst for us being able to bring these pieces together. We've been able to categorize the diversity of India as an innovation opportunity. And if you're able to do that successfully, you're able to do it for the world.
I just love this example, and I feel like we should really be able to do that here. We have slightly under 120 languages that we need to deal with, so it feels really doable. But I just think this is a great example of how you can use this technology today, and it's only going to get better over time. I'm going to switch a little bit now to focusing on topics that are a little closer to the cultural sector. So this is the framework at Microsoft that we use to think about how digital technologies can enable all of the sort of work that you guys do. I think almost all, I was going to go through and highlight these, these are the ones that could be impacted by AI, but then I thought actually all of them would be highlighted. So I'm going to talk about a couple of areas. The first space I was going to talk about is digitization of collections. you guys will know way better than me just how complicated this is, but a couple of the areas that have stood out to me in my research around just the fragility of the materials that you're working with, how much time it can take to really catalog things, and how difficult it can be to get the right metadata as you're digitizing these artifacts, and to make sure that that's standardized. I think we're already starting to see AI come into play in a lot of these spaces. It's not that long ago that the young computer science student was able to decipher words from the sort of burnt up scrolls as part of the Vesuvius challenge, if you guys heard about that. These scrolls that they're so fragile, you cannot work with them at all. You can't take them you can't unroll them, you can't take them out of the sort of sealed environment that they're in. And so we have to come up with, if we want to see what's on them, we have to come up with a way to get into the information that's in there. And AI is starting to enable us to be able to do things like that. I think there's other applications of that as well. Materials that you just don't want to handle too much, you could be able to handle them in a quite different, quite lighter way. Another sort of general capability of generative AI is to create a good first draft. I don't know if anybody has tried the tools that are out there to do this, but you could certainly apply that to the concept of coming up with the metadata for objects as well. I'm sure there's many ways that you already do this in terms of looking at databases where the information exists, or just leveraging your own expertise. But these systems should be able to just look at a photo of an object and have a go, and sort of draft something, and then leave it to the experts to refine those drafts rather than start from scratch. This is another example out of India, actually. This is from the Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore, and I think this is a good example of what you can do on top of the digitization. So their mission was to build the connections between objects, especially textiles. So rather than only being able to search or filter or draw connections based on metadata, you could actually look at a costume or a uniform and then see where else are things like that being reflected in other types of art. So in artwork, in objects drawn on a vase, for example, and see all of those different connections. And beyond that, start to see connections between institutions. So this is one of the experiences they really wanted to be able to provide people to, say, bring one image and start a journey from there and say, I want to learn all the connections from this object and build on that, and not be limited by all the things around me. So that's one example that can build on the digitization. Another space where I think AI can really help is around experience. Obviously, there's been lots of work in this over the years already. Lots of technology enabled experiences exist in terms of wayfinding or personalization or even gamification. When you're in an exhibit, like how many of these things can you find to help you have like a really interesting path? But I think there's more work to be done around personalization. And I think generative AI offers a huge opportunity around enabling people to co-create in these spaces. So the example I've got here is the Revolution exhibit pop-up that was part of the Hip Hop Museum in New York. I think it's since closed, unfortunately. But I think this video gives just a little bit of an insight into how they're using AI to really create those very hyper-interactive experiences.
The early pioneers were literally hacking technology of the day, and if we aren't using innovation, we're not doing it justice. We've started to employ things like AI that we used in the Break Big narratives. Your interaction with this platform establishes a personal narrative. We have motion sensor technology where you can play with a graffiti wall. All of these things are really just us starting to play around.
My hope is that future generations will be able to look at hip-hop and see that it spoke truth to power.
And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about the creators. You're probably starting to hear already about AI-generated art, winning awards or trying to win awards. Got a couple of examples here, including the Pseudomnesia, which quite famously almost won the Sony World Photography Competition until the creator fessed up to say, actually, I generated that with AI. Got a couple other examples here. Twin Sisters in Love, which has won a specific AI category in a contest in Australia, and Hekimai, which is currently a finalist in one of our portraiture competitions here in New Zealand. There's also the quite well-known example, the unsupervised exhibit at the Met, which was based on hundreds of years of objects and artwork from MoMA. I think these are really interesting examples. They make you think, who actually owns this AI-generated art? In this example, you can at least see the artwork in between the transitions. So you'll see real art and then AI-generated transitions between them. But in some ways, it is the transition that is the experience. It's that sort of mesmerizing, slow transition that draws you in. And if you think about the art that I was talking about that was generated by AI, it's very interesting. What is the art about that? Is it the prompt that was written? Is it the output that came out? How do you think about that? And then we also need to, of course, think about protecting the creators who make the art on which models are trained, and by which then they are able to do this sort of work. There are some protections coming into place. A lot of the bigger companies are making it not possible to request art in the style of any living artist. There are more and more ways are coming out for artists to say, please don't include my art in the building of any model. But I think even that's quite difficult, because what if other artists have copied you and their art is included in the model? Like, how does that influence play out? Those are all really big questions, I think, that we need to think about in this era. But as we go along, there's some protections coming in, like I mentioned, not being able to generate art that's based on living artists. There's copyright protections that you might hear coming out from Adobe and from Microsoft. This is another space where we're trying to help content credentials. This is all about digital watermarking, making it so that you can trust the provenance of an image or a video. So if you see the metadata, you can believe it. The initial application of this is actually around deepfakes and elections, so that's a bit of the timing behind this, to try to get this out there, so that the people can have a bit of faith about what they're seeing in ad campaigns and things like that. But I think it's quite applicable to this space as well. So most of the things I've talked about today are specific solutions or specific systems that have been developed to address specific problems or opportunities. But a whole nother space that is emerging around this is this AI technology is coming to you in the tools that you use already every day. So in the case of Microsoft, that whole list of co-pilots that I had quite early in my talk is one example. If anybody uses Outlook or Word or Teams or Excel, or if you're like me and you use a lot of PowerPoint, there's co-pilot capabilities that are coming to all of these tools right now. There's opportunities around this as well, I think, to think about how specific of a solution do you need to solve your problem. For example, if you're drafting up a description of an artifact for an exhibit, or for even to post it on a web page somewhere, pretty soon in Word, you'll be able to say, build me a description of artifact X based on Y information in Z style. That's absolutely coming, and you'll be able to do that in Word. You won't necessarily have to have a separate solution to be able to do that. But of course, there are things that need to be in place in order for an organization to set that up properly. So I think organizations are going to need to start deciding, when do you buy or build something quite specific? When do you use a general tool? When is it okay to use something that's open, like ChatGPT? When do you need to use something that's going to really protect your data, that's more of an enterprise type solution? All of those questions are coming. Just thinking a little bit about what's next. Obviously, we've seen huge advancements in this space in the last year. I really like this drawing, because it sort of shows what different capabilities come out in these models as they get bigger. This illustration is actually quite dated already, because the models that we're using today are much bigger than this already. But it's quite interesting to think, as far as I know, nobody taught any of the GPTs how to understand jokes. That's a capability that just emerged as they started to learn more about language and more about, what sort of words are followed by words that indicate that someone found something funny. Just like a kid would learn humor So I think that's really interesting. We do see a lot of capability grow as these models get bigger, but size is not the only thing. If anybody has followed the announcements out of OpenAI, before all the drama of the last 24 hours, but with their dev day last week, with their GPT-4 Turbo, the main thing that came out with that new model is actually the context window. So that just means you can write a really long prompt. You can ask really complicated questions. You can say something like, hey, summarize this book, and paste in the whole book. And so that also, those are the sorts of things that also make these models really useful. And so this is going to continue changing. And I guess my challenge to you and anyone else is to get across this. You know, like sometimes I think it can feel like, oh, this is just the next hype, this is the next metaverse. But I think that these changes are quite real, and we're all going to be encountering them in lots of different ways. And it's up to us to be across the risks and the opportunities, and to think about how we want to prepare for that and leverage that both in our organizations and as individuals. Thank you so much for having me. This great topic in a great space, and this has just been wonderful.